Two experts wrote a report on what was going on in West Coast ports, and they concluded that both sides were engaged in surface bargaining. They weren't actually dealing with the issues at hand because they assumed you would step in. Certainly the unions in Montreal and Vancouver have said that their employers want you to step in and that they're not negotiating to force you to do that. Are you concerned you're being used in this?
Except they are negotiating. The process belongs to the parties alone, but the consequences impact the lives of working people and families across Canada. As Canada's Minister of Labour, it is my duty and responsibility to secure industrial peace in the national interest of all Canadians and to promote conditions favourable to the settlement of the parties' disputes. So today, I have invoked my authorities under the Canada Labour Code. Under Section 107 of the Code, I've directed the Canada Industrial Relations Board to order that all operations and duties at the ports resume and to assist the parties in settling their collective agreements by imposing final and binding arbitration. This will bring the necessary resolutions for both workers and employers. I have also directed the Board to extend the terms of the existing collective agreements until new ones are established. There will be a debate about this, the second such use of this instrument to settle a long-standing labour dispute. I welcome that debate. La patience des Canadiens.
Canadians' patience with disruptions to our supply chains has been tested, and it is wearing thin. The threat to our national interest and the economic well-being of Canadians is too great. Canadians expect the parties to negotiate fair agreements and to do so quickly. That has not been the case here. I want to emphasize that there is a limit to the economic self-destruction that Canadians are prepared to accept. The best agreements are always negotiated agreements, but when agreements are delayed or never come, and in the face of economic self-destruction, there is an obligation to intervene. As Minister of Labour, that responsibility falls upon me. For Canadians,
are impacting our supply chain, hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs, our economy, and our reputation as a reliable and international trading partner. We rely on the movement of goods through our ports. If these work stoppages go on, the impacts will only worsen, and our well-earned reputation for reliability will be put at risk. Because of these impasses, more than $1.3 billion in value of goods is affected every day. Canada's economy is taking a hit. Farmers, small businesses, manufacturers, retailers, families. The list goes on of those already feeling the impacts. Not only that, but also thousands of hardworking Canadians could be laid off if this continues, including thousands of union workers. 200 in one company, 350 in another, and that weeks before Christmas. For example, a company reached out to me yesterday and told me that because they have no vehicles left on the dock and they haven't had a vessel in a week, they will have to make layoffs as soon as today. They added that customers are ripping up their contracts and going elsewhere, U.S. West Coast, U.S. East, Gulf Coast. This is happening all across the country. The impact that these stoppages could have on Canada's potash industry would be devastating. We need the potash mine for fertilizer to reach the farmers who grow food all over the world. Already, Canadian companies relying on potash exports have had to turn to international suppliers such as Russia, driving up costs and hurting competitiveness. Les constructeurs automobiles sont
car makers are facing delays as essential parts from Asia are held up in ports, threatening our jobs. Retailers, especially in the run-up to the holiday season, face empty shelves as essential stocks failed to arrive on time. Even basic products like salt. Salt is needed to produce liquid chlorine for drinking water in our municipalities, in particular in Western and Northern Canada. Several exporters also mentioned that they will have to increase product costs in order to compensate for the additional costs associated with transport logistics.
I am committed to ensuring a swift resolution to protect our economy and the livelihoods of Canadians. I should add that I am grateful that my predecessor, Seamus O'Regan, launched an industrial inquiry in the West Coast ports to examine structural problems with collective bargaining and others. Given the current situation, it seems clear to me that we will have to examine their work very, very carefully to see how longer-term solutions can be applied to those and other ports and similar disputes across the country. It is our government's responsibility to ensure industrial peace. Mais je suis extrêmement fier de faire.
I'm extremely proud to be part of a government that is committed to fair collective bargaining negotiations and to ensuring that workers receive fair agreements. Clearly, collective bargaining is not easy, but we have seen time and time again that it produces the strongest, most enduring agreements to the benefit of unions, employees, their families, and employers alike. I wish to reaffirm that negotiated agreements remain the best way forward. We cannot afford for Canadians to suffer when the parties fail to live up to their responsibilities, that is, to reach agreements together. We reiterate that none of this would be necessary if the parties could sit down and reach an agreement. This is not out of the question. And our mediators remain available to assist. Thank you. Thank you. We will now move on to questions and answers. I will begin with the room. Please ask questions and follow-up questions short. Please keep them short.
Please keep the question short, answer short as well. So Jordan Golding, Financial Post, you want to go first?
Hi, Minister. Can you just provide a timeline on how quickly you expect work to resume at both these ports in light of the order you've made today?
The board will take up the directive, I know, with great dispatch. It should take a matter of days for them to react and issue an order. Obviously, just as in the earlier circumstance, the board is an independent agency, so its actions belong to it and it alone, but it should not take an undue amount of time.
This is the second time now in 1 year that you've issued binding arbitration. You said that this might prompt some debate. Are you concerned at all about the precedent you're setting with regards to intervening in the collective bargaining process?
It's certainly not something I take lightly. My belief and the government's belief in collective bargaining and in the fact that collective agreements that are reached at the bargaining table are the most durable agreements it is possible to conclude, that has not changed. However, when mediators, who are among, it should be said, the best in the world, inform me in 3 different circumstances that we are at a total impasse and the way forward is not clear, the duration of the disputes is not clear, and there is real economic, health, and other risks posed to Canadians, then that I take that responsibility extremely seriously. And Canadians, as I said, have limited tolerance right now for economic self-harm.
Michel Comte, Agence France-Presse.
You mentioned in your statement that the government's identified structural problems in collective bargaining, particularly as it relates to transportation. In your view, what's needed? Are we talking about a wholesale change in the process or just some tweaks, and how long do you think that will take to bring about to put forward these changes?
I don't have a prescription, but I do have a very good diagnosis. And what I have observed in my tenure as Minister of Labour is that we have these negotiations that stretch over months and years and need not. Days and days and weeks of mediator and conciliator time is spent with these parties. The positions of both sides are well known to each other over a long period of time. People have the opportunity to consider those positions, consider what a compromise might look like, but those compromises never seem to come. And so, as I said in my remarks, we need parties to act with greater urgency. in these circumstances and to conclude deals that are in the best interests of their members or the best interests of their other stakeholders, in the case of employers. We want a competitive economy, but we want people making good wages and working in safe workplaces too. Those arrangements are best worked out at the negotiating table. But in these circumstances and in the prior circumstances, there was no perspective, no possibility, realistically, of that occurring.
Follow-up, Michel? No? Ryan Tumulty, Toronto Star.
Minister, you mentioned the industrial inquiry that's underway. Prior to that, there was an expert, two experts wrote a report on what was going on in West Coast ports, and they concluded that both sides were engaged in surface bargaining. They weren't actually dealing with the issues at hand because they assumed you would step in. Certainly the unions in Montreal and Vancouver have said that their employers want you to step in and that they're not negotiating to force you to do that. Are you concerned you're being used in this?
Except they are negotiating. In the case of these three disputes, we have over 2 years on average worth of negotiations to point to. Mediators spend days and days and weeks with these parties. Offers are tabled. It is not for me to determine the terms of any collective agreement. I am merely cheering for an agreement. But the fact is that employers and employees sit down for marathon bargaining sessions. And unfortunately, in these cases, they've gone nowhere. So as the economic losses threaten the country and begin to mount, it is up to the government to ensure that a fair settlement's reached. Arbitration leads to fair settlements, maybe not as durable as those that are reached at the bargaining table, and that we can get on with the economic life of this country and avoid layoffs and other carnage in many of our commercial sectors and for workers and their families.
But you stepped in, you're stepping in here, you had to step in the railway dispute, WestJet last year. I think you came very close to having to step in with the other Port of Vancouver strike. Are you just concerned that even though they're negotiating, they're sitting at the table, they're not actually bargaining, they're not changing their positions?
We've concluded deals too. We concluded deals with the Air Canada pilots in the grain terminals on the West Coast, and Prince Rupert just ratified. We concluded deals with the Videotron workers that had gone on for a great many months. So deals are getting reached at the bargaining table. Deals are getting reached even in the logistics and transportation sector. But no deal, according to the experts who are accompanying these parties, is possible in the short or medium term in the present circumstance. So when Canada's economy, Canadians' health is threatened, any responsible government has to step in.
Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur Mick.
Good morning, Minister. Every time there's an impasse and a labor dispute, like in a previous example, and you impose binding arbitration, does that not hurt the right to strike? We believe that we are taking reasonable measures in these cases. The goal being to resolve an issue that's been ongoing for 2 years in one case, and in other cases, the issues at stake have been going on for over a year. Both parties have full freedom to reach agreements with the support of our mediators. Were I to quote the Montreal example, I visited both parties in October and I suggested a new mediator, a different face in the room. Both parties arrived with preconditions when it came to nominating a mediator. Thus, you will understand that we are far from a negotiated agreement at the bargaining table. Meanwhile, threats of employees losing their jobs in the manufacturing industry in Quebec and retail and throughout the Canadian supply chain on the East Coast and on the West Coast would push any responsible government to protect Canadians, to protect the Canadian economy. It is no longer the time to play around with our economy and the issues at stake. The issues at stake here are not legal when it comes to what is at stake within the Canadian economy. Or rather, are not the equivalent of what is at stake in the Canadian economy. Therefore, we need to send the parties to a mediator in order to allow the Canadian economy to resume its normal rhythm. Question. Employers have the ability to put workers in a lockout because they know that Ottawa will step in. They're still negotiating. Of course, it is incumbent upon the union to accept or reject an employer's offer, regardless of the case. And it is incumbent upon employees to choose as they will. I've observed that parties are not acting with a sense of urgency. And so, are you saying that the unions are acting in bad faith? No, absolutely not. I said the parties. Parties are not acting with the urgency, the sense of urgency expected by Canadians. CTV.
Saying that you have to wait for the board to act, but when can Canadians and Canadian businesses expect activity in the ports to restart? Do you have a date in mind?
I can only go with what we observed in the last year or so, and that it was a matter of days. But again, the CIRB is an independent entity, and it will pursue its processes as it deems correct.
I wanted to ask you about another labor issue that could be coming. Canada Post issued a 72-hour notice of a strike. 3 years ago, your government did legislate them back to work. Because of the issue in the House of Commons right now, with no business being able to be tabled or done at all, you're not going to have that lever. So what are you looking at in terms of trying to make sure that if this does get to the point where we are at today and we are near the busy Christmas season, what are you going to do?
Well, we are hoping to achieve a deal at the table. The issues at hand in the Canada Post negotiations are substantial. They're significant. There's a lot of work to do. And I know the parties are negotiating today. We will make every effort possible to keep them at the table and keep them talking. And we hope to achieve a negotiated settlement there.
Brian Platt, Bloomberg.
Hi, Minister. Until this year, if a government wanted to impose binding arbitration, it passed legislation in Parliament. Is this the end of that now? You've now acted twice without using legislation. Do you think this is the end of Parliament having a say in this process?
I'm not here to declare the beginning or the end of anything. We take these disputes individually. Obviously, we have 3 today that have converged, where Canadians expect us to act in the interests of their economy and their jobs. So that's what we're doing. But Labour ministers must examine the facts as they are in any given case and act in the way he or she deems most expedient. And in this case, this is the path we chose.
This is a government that has tried to have good relations with organized labor. Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that you expect this decision will prompt a debate. What reaction have you gotten when you acted through this executive measure to end the rail strike, and now you've acted again? How worried are you about permanently damaging your relations with organized labor, with the Liberal Party and organized labor?
We've worked very hard to be a government that favors the interests of workers, their economic well-being, that of their families, and of course to work on items that are important to the labor movement. That has included things like sick days, the passage of C-58, which bans replacement workers, which I would note again have been in use in Quebec City for some time now. Those two added to a number of other initiatives, consultations, specific tangible actions that we've taken that make life better for Canadian workers. I know that the labor leaders that I speak to understand that all of these cases, just as I just said, are different. I will obviously let them speak for themselves. I don't think it would be unreasonable for me to observe that they would also prefer that these deals be done at the table. But that makes two of us.
Marina van Stackelberg, CBC.
The strike notice from the Union for Canada Post workers means that mail carriers could be off the job as early as Friday. If that happens, will the federal government intervene to stop that from happening?
Our plan is to support collective bargaining at this stage.
And just to follow up, you have mentioned in the past that federal mediators have been involved. Has the government put any additional resources into this as we see this strike notice being issued?
We've put all the resources that are required into supporting the parties in Canada Post.
Can you be a bit more specific?
That's mediation support.
Bill Curry, Globe and Mail.
Good morning. On another topic, still trade related, Doug Ford said today he would like to see Canada focus on striking a bilateral trade deal with the United States because the issues that Mexico has with the U.S. are completely different than Canada's concerns. What do you make of that proposal?
I'm going to let those responsible for that issue speak to it. As you can imagine, Bill, I've spent most of my time lately working on what we're talking about this morning.
Okay. On labor disputes, your actions on the rail front are currently before the courts. What was your thinking in taking this action today, given that you still haven't received the ruling from the courts on the legality of your actions on the rail front?
The parties are, of course, pursuing all of their rights, reserving all of their rights, and pursuing the legal challenges that you just mentioned. Obviously, that's something that we were expecting, but it's also something we expect to defend vigorously in court. When these decisions are taken, they're taken after a long look and with a view to the reasonableness of the action and the proportionality of the issues that we are resolving vis-a-vis the issues that might exist at the bargaining table. So we maintain that this decision is made under powers that are granted to me by the Parliament of Canada, and we will defend those actions vigorously in court.
Kyle Duggan, Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister. I'm wondering, you had mentioned Canada's trading relationship. What kind of things have you been hearing from your American counterparts, from U.S. businesses? Have you been engaged with them? What are they saying? What kind of pressure are you feeling?
I've been listening to Canadian businesses and consulting widely with Canadians and hearing very carefully their interventions with respect to this. As for the U.S., all I would observe is that you will know of the labor issues that exist on the East and Gulf Coast ports. We obviously followed that very carefully. That is an issue that is not yet resolved, so I don't have any specific comment on that. Canada makes decisions in the best interest of Canadians and based on facts that are present in Canada.
And can you to explain to Canadians who have been following these labor issues, but not the specifics of each individual contract, just the general pattern of this kind of stop-and-go labor disruption, why haven't you been stepping in sooner in these cases? Your mediation talks failed ultimately. A lot of these instances, it seems like they're kind of bound to this kind of conclusion. So why aren't you stepping in faster?
We want to give every chance for collective bargaining to succeed. We want to support the parties as long as we can, and sometimes, of course, these things become, they go right down to the wire. When labor disruptions occur, when work stoppages occur, whether they are initiated by unions or employers, then we have to consider the health, economic, trade, and other implications for Canadians and the impact on other working Canadians. So that's what we do. That's what I do. And we make moves that I believe are reasonable under the circumstances, but only after exhausting a collective bargaining process that we continue to believe in.
Gillian Piper, Global.
Hi, Minister. Thanks for taking our questions. Why do you think that your government has faced so many major strikes back to back? Is this a breakdown of the collective bargaining process?
No, we've settled. There have been many contracts, whether under federal jurisdiction or not. The collective bargaining continues to function in Canada and continues to function well. And we've, even in the federally regulated sector, concluded several successful rounds of bargaining in the past little while. As I said earlier, we take all of these issues on a case-by-case basis, evaluate the facts that are before us, and take actions that we believe are reasonable under the circumstances and worthy of the trust that Canadians place in us to manage them.
An NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, when your government issued binding arbitration in the rail strike, said, there's really no difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals. Both of them are going to be beholden to the employer. Do you think that issuing binding arbitration twice in 1 year, as you've pointed out, is seriously damaging your relationship with working voters? And is that repairable in your eyes?
There are a lot of working Canadians whose jobs depend on our supply chains functioning. I mentioned some of them in my statement: auto workers, potash workers, farmers, small business people who need merchandise for their shelves to sell at Christmas. So I view actions to restore order, reasonable actions to restore order in our supply chains, as being pro-worker. I do not like reading of layoffs. I do not like hearing of instability. And obviously we want to make sure that our economy continues to function, that our trading relationships continue to function, and that international commitments that Canadian companies and workers have made to supply other countries are honored. Those are the things we consider, and those are fundamentally pro-worker impulses.
On me dit qu'on a le temps pour une dernière question.